The wind howled through the skeletal trees, carrying with it the distant echoes of artillery fire. Snow fell steadily, cloaking the battered village in an eerie stillness. From his perch, high on a wooded ridge, Sergei peered through his scope, eyes sharp, breath slow. He had been stationed here for days, watching, waiting, his finger always near the trigger, his heart dulled by repetition. Below, the village looked lifeless. Houses with shattered windows and sagging roofs leaned wearily into the storm. Once this place had been full of people, laughter, children's voices. Now it was a ghost town, scarred by war. Sergei adjusted his position, his elbow digging into the frozen earth. His breath fogged the scope, and he wiped it absently, eyes scanning the streets for any sign of movement. Command had warned of enemy fighters using abandoned villages like this as cover. His orders were clear: eliminate any threat. Hours passed, the cold seeping into his bones. His mind drifted, memories of home, of warmth, of a life before the endless cold and blood. He shook it off. Focus, always focus. Then a flicker of movement. Sergei's eyes narrowed. Through the falling snow, near the edge of the village, a small figure darted between buildings. He swung his rifle smoothly, tracking the shape as it disappeared behind a crumbling wall. Too small for an adult. A scout? A messenger? He steadied his breath, finger tightening on the trigger. Minutes crawled by. Then the figure emerged again, creeping toward what looked like an old storage shed. Sergei zoomed in, eyes sharpening. A child. His heartbeat quickened, not out of compassion but confusion. What was a child doing here? Alone? Through the scope, Sergei could make out a boy, no more than 10 or 11. He was bundled in oversized clothes, boots too big for his feet, a woolen scarf wrapped tightly around his face. His movements were deliberate, focused. He wasn't running in panic, he was searching. Sergei's training screamed at him, "Don't assume." Children had been used before, to scout, to lure soldiers into traps. His finger hovered near the trigger again, but then something strange. A sudden sharp blast of artillery cracked the air, echoing across the hills. The boy didn't flinch. He didn't duck or cover his ears. He kept moving, steady and silent, as though nothing had happened. Sergei frowned. That was unnatural. He watched closely now, studying every movement. The boy lifted a broken crate, examined its contents, then moved on. No panic, no reaction to noise, almost mechanical. And then Sergei understood. He's deaf. The realization hit him like a punch. Sergei lowered his rifle slightly, his breath ragged. This wasn't a scout, a trap, or a threat. This was a boy, alone, vulnerable, and cut off from the world in more ways than one. For the first time in a long while, Sergei hesitated. He kept watching as the boy, Maxim, though Sergei didn't know his name yet, gathered what little he could carry: a battered tin of food, some scraps of cloth, a cracked lantern. Maxim's eyes, wide and hollow, scanned the desolation around him, his breath misting in the freezing air. Sergei exhaled slowly and shifted his rifle aside. His orders were clear, but for this moment, his heart made its own command. He would watch, he would wait, and he would not pull the trigger. The cold was sharper that morning, biting through Sergei's uniform as he shifted his weight against the frozen ground. His breath, ragged and white, coiled up and vanished into the bleak sky. The scope of his rifle had become his world, a narrow tunnel of sight that never seemed to widen. It had been days since Sergei first spotted the boy. He had watched Maxim scurry like a shadow between the skeletons of bombed-out buildings, always alone, always searching. There was something about the boy's quiet resilience that unsettled Sergei more than the crack of distant gunfire ever could. But today felt different. Sergei noticed Maxim earlier than usual, moving quickly, more determined. The boy carried a worn satchel slung across his shoulder, his small boots crunching in the hard snow as he made his way, toward the outskirts of the village. "Where are you going?" Sergei wondered, tracking the boy through his scope. Maxim stopped near an old factory building, half collapsed. Iron beams twisted skyward like broken bones. He paused, glanced around, then slipped through a gap in the wall. Sergei's eyes narrowed. This was new. Inside, Maxim moved methodically, rummaging through debris, pulling out what looked like medical supplies, a tattered first aid kit, some glass vials. His small hands worked with precision, his eyes sharp with purpose. Sergei's training kicked in like a reflex. Why now? Why this place? Could this be a setup, a decoy? His breath slowed, finger resting lightly on the trigger. Then Maxim emerged from the building, holding a small bundle close to his chest. He moved quickly now, urgency in his steps, as he headed toward the tree line. Sergei's muscles tensed. The boy was making a run for it, his scope centered on Maxim's back. The boy was alone, no visible backup, but Sergei's instincts screamed at him. Something wasn't right. He tightened his grip, breath steadying. Suddenly a noise, a metallic clatter as Maxim tripped over a broken pipe, falling hard into the snow. His bundle spilled open, not weapons, not supplies for soldiers, but bandages, painkillers, small bottles of antiseptic. Sergei's brow furrowed. He adjusted his aim, the crosshairs locking onto the boy's chest. And then it happened again. A blast echoed from afar, a distant explosion that shook the sky. Maxim didn't flinch, not a single muscle moved. He simply gathered his spilled items with quiet determination, deaf to the world around him. Sergei's breath hitched. He remembered the first time he'd seen it. Maxim's lack of reaction, his mechanical calm. The boy wasn't fearless. He was disconnected, detached by something no weapon could pierce. He's deaf, Sergei thought again, a cold knot twisting in his gut. Through the scope, he watched Maxim tie his satchel tightly and push himself to his feet, his small figure dwarfed by the desolation around him. Sergei's finger hovered over the trigger. But he couldn't move it, not this time. His heart pounded as he pulled back, lifting his eye from the scope, staring down at the boy with bare, unfiltered sight. Maxim disappeared into the trees, oblivious to how close death had been. Sergei sat back, rifle across his knees, and exhaled shakily. The silence around him was deafening. Days blurred into each other like snowflakes lost in a blizzard. Sergei kept his vigil from the ridge, but something had shifted. His eyes no longer scanned for enemy soldiers alone. Now they sought out a small, familiar figure, a boy moving through the ruins like a whisper. Maximum. Sergei found himself watching the boy's every move with a strange, growing sense of responsibility. Maxim was resourceful. He scavenged for food, melted snow for water, found hidden corners of half-destroyed houses to sleep in. But no matter how careful he was, the war closing in around them didn't care about innocence. One bitter morning, Sergei spotted Maxim near an abandoned well, prying at frozen buckets. Sergei's stomach twisted when he noticed something else. Fresh footprints in the snow, not Maxim's. Soldiers. Too close. Sergei's eyes darted to the tree line. 2 Russian soldiers, weapons slung lazily across their shoulders, approached from the east. They hadn't seen Maxim yet. Sergei's breath slowed. His finger hovered over the trigger. He couldn't fire at his own men, but he couldn't let them find the boy either. Maxim, oblivious, kept tugging at the rope, his small body straining. Sergei aimed a few meters to the left of the soldiers and squeezed the trigger. A sharp crack echoed through the woods, splintering a tree trunk. The soldiers froze, startled, their heads jerking toward the noise. Sergei fired again, closer this time, making sure the message was clear. Move along. The soldiers shouted nervously to each other and retreated, weapons raised, eyes scanning the trees. Maxim, still tugging at the bucket, hadn't even flinched. Sergei lowered his rifle, exhaling shakily. That was too close. Over the next few days, Sergei began leaving small bundles near places Maxim frequented: half a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a canteen half filled with water, a wool scarf he no longer used, always left in plain sight, never with any indication of who had left them. He watched from afar as Maxim discovered the items. The boy's brows furrowed in confusion at first, his wide eyes scanning the empty landscape. Then cautiously, he took the offerings, clutching them tightly to his chest, before disappearing into the shadows of his ruined village. Sergei told himself it was nothing. Survival instinct. A simple act to ease the gnawing guilt in his gut. But deep down, he knew it was more. He had crossed an invisible line. Each night, as he lay beneath his makeshift cover on the ridge, Sergei stared up at the dark, starless sky and wondered what the hell he was doing. The war raged on around them, uncaring, unstoppable, and yet here he was, protecting a boy who should have been his enemy. Maxim, too, began to sense something. Though he couldn't hear the world's chaos, he could feel the eyes watching over him. Not with malice, but with quiet guardianship. He moved with a little less fear, his steps slightly steadier, as though he knew he was not entirely alone. In the silence between them, something unspoken grew, a fragile bond woven not with words, but with actions. And high on his ridge, Sergei stayed watchful, ever the silent guardian. The snow fell heavier that night, blanketing the world in an oppressive quiet that even Sergei could feel in his bones. His fingers, numb and stiff, gripped the cold steel of his rifle as he scanned the darkened landscape through his scope. Visibility was poor, shadows blurring into one another, but his instincts prickled with unease. Somewhere below, Maxim was out there again. Sergei hadn't seen the boy for hours. That alone was unusual. Maxim's patterns, his cautious scurrying, his brief forays into the open had become familiar. Tonight, something was different. Suddenly, a faint crunching noise broke through the white noise of falling snow. Sergei's breath hitched. He lowered the scope and turned sharply. A shadow was moving closer than he had ever seen before. Too close. Sergei's muscles tensed as the figure stepped into the narrow path beside the ridge. It was Maxim. The boy was bundled tight in his patched coat, his breath puffing visibly in the cold air. He was clutching a small tin, no doubt salvaged from one of his scavenging runs, but his eyes were wide, scanning nervously. He had wandered too far, unknowingly drifting toward Sergei's hidden nest. Sergei's heart pounded. He moved fast, instinct overriding thought. Setting his rifle aside, he slid down silently from his perch, boots crunching softly in the deep snow. Within moments, he was behind the boy. Maxim must have felt the shift in air because he spun around, eyes huge with shock. But before he could run, Sergei's hand shot out, gripping his arm tightly. "Shh," Sergei hissed instinctively, though the irony of the word struck him immediately. Maxim couldn't hear. His chest heaved, eyes darting wildly in panic. He dropped the tin, his free hand scrabbling to push Sergei away. For a second, Sergei felt the boy's sheer terror pulse through him. Maxim was shaking, fighting like a cornered animal, though his strength was no match. Sergei knelt down quickly, loosening his grip just enough to meet the boy's gaze head-on. Their eyes locked, Maxim's full of fear and confusion, Sergei's tense but searching. Slowly, Sergei raised his free hand, palm open, fingers spread, a universal sign of peace. Maxim froze, his breath coming in ragged bursts. His eyes flicked between Sergei's face and his hand, confusion warring with fear. Sergei moved carefully now, lifting his other hand to point to his own chest. Then, very deliberately, he pushed the rifle lying in the snow aside, out of Maxim's sight. Maxim's eyes flicked to the rifle, then back to Sergei's face. His trembling eased just a little. For a long moment, they stayed like that. Two enemies caught in a fragile bubble of silence. the war's distant echoes muffled by falling snow. Sergei, heart thudding, released Maxim's arm completely and took a slow step back, keeping his hands raised. He pointed to the tin that lay in the snow and gently nudged it toward the boy. Maxim hesitated, eyes narrowing. Then cautiously, he bent down and retrieved it, his fingers brushing the snow away. Still wary, Maxim took a step back, then another. Sergei didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stood there, watching. Finally, Maxim turned and bolted, disappearing into the dark maze of ruined buildings, the tin clutched tightly in his arms. Sergei stood alone in the snow, breathless, the world around him settling into stillness once more. He knew something had changed. A line had been crossed tonight, not one drawn by borders or battles, but by two strangers whose lives had collided in the quiet heart of war. And deep down, Sergei knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed their encounter unfolded in a strange, delicate rhythm. Sergei resumed his vigil from the ridge, but everything had changed. The battlefield below was no longer just a tangle of ruins and shadows. It was a place inhabited by someone Sergei could no longer think of as the enemy, Maximum. The boy moved with the same quiet determination as before, but now Sergei noticed the subtle shifts. Maxim's eyes scanning the horizon more often, his steps a little more cautious, as if aware that someone was watching over him. And Sergei was watching. Always. He no longer tracked just for danger. He tracked for signs of Maxim's well-being. Each time the boy appeared, Sergei felt a strange flicker of relief. Each time Maxim vanished into the ruins, that familiar knot of worry returned. One morning, Sergei spotted Maxim struggling to drag a wooden crate through the snow. The boy's small body strained, boots slipping as he tried to get it over a fallen beam. Sergei's fingers twitched with the urge to help, but he remained still, hidden. This was Maxim's fight. Instead, that night, Sergei left something extra near Maxim's usual scavenging route, a sturdy piece of rope coiled neatly atop a crate. No note, no sign, just a silent offering. The next day he watched as Maxim found it. The boy paused, eyes narrowing in suspicion at first. He picked up the rope, turning it over in his hands, glancing around cautiously. Then after a moment he tucked it into his coat and continued on. A silent thank you. That night, Sergei lay awake under the canopy of branches, listening to the distant rumble of war. His mind replayed the look in Maxim's eyes, that flicker of trust, brief but unmistakable. The pact between them, though never spoken, had become real. As winter deepened, Sergei noticed Maxim's routines shifting. The boy started leaving small markers, stones arranged in odd patterns near familiar paths, a piece of broken wood wedged into a crack in the wall. At first, Sergei didn't understand. Then realization dawned. Maxim was signaling to him. A warning system. If danger lurked nearby, Maxim would tilt a certain stone just so, or leave a small pile of ash in a doorway. It was primitive, but effective. A language without words, built on necessity and trust. One night, a low growl of engines echoed across the village. Sergei's muscles tensed as he scanned the landscape. Lights flared, Russian patrols sweeping the area, hunting for stragglers and insurgents. He looked down toward the old church where Maxim often hid. His chest tightened. He moved quickly, heart pounding, slipping down from his perch and weaving silently through the trees until he reached a vantage point near the church. His breath caught. Maxim was there, pressed flat against the cracked stone wall, eyes wide with terror, as the beams of flashlights danced closer. Sergei lifted his rifle, sighting down at the patrol. He couldn't fire, not at his own men, but he had to do something. Thinking fast, he swung his aim toward an abandoned truck a few meters away and squeezed the trigger. The explosion of glass was deafening as the windshield shattered. The patrol whipped around, weapons raised, shouting commands. Sergei fired again, this time at a lamppost, sending sparks flying. "Move! Flank right!" a voice barked. The soldiers scrambled, distracted by the sudden chaos. Maxim didn't hesitate. He darted from his hiding place and disappeared into the maze of ruins. Sergei exhaled hard, lowering his rifle as the patrol's voices faded into the distance. Later that night, when the village had fallen silent once more, Sergei spotted something near the base of his ridge. Cautiously, he descended to investigate. It was a small, battered tin can. Inside, tucked among scraps of cloth, was a single, perfect apple. Sergei stared, a smile ghosting across his tired face. No words, no sounds. But the message was clear. They were no longer alone. The wind had changed. Sergei felt it in his bones long before he saw the signs. The sudden urgency in the radio chatter, the clipped tones of his commanding officer. Reinforcements were arriving. The order was clear. Sweep the entire village. Root out any remaining enemies. Leave nothing behind. Nothing. Sergei sat in his hidden perch, fingers tightening around his rifle, jaw clenched. His eyes drifted toward the village where Maxim moved silently through the ruins, unaware of the storm brewing around him. He whispered under his breath, "You need to run, kid." But Maxim couldn't hear warnings, couldn't sense betrayal in the cold, mechanical movements of soldiers advancing on his fragile world. The first sign came as a distant hum, armored vehicles crawling over the icy ground. Then boots, too many boots, thudding rhythmically, echoing off broken walls. Sergei's scope revealed shadows moving with deadly precision, flashlights slicing through the night. They were closing in. Panic coiled in Sergei's chest. His earpiece crackled to life. Sector 5, moving in. Report any movement. His hand trembled as he pressed the button. Sector clear, no signs. A lie. He watched as Maxim, oblivious, darted into a crumbling house near the square. The boy's breath misted in the cold as he worked quickly, stuffing salvaged items into his worn satchel. Too late. Two soldiers rounded the corner, rifles raised, shouts splitting the silence. Maxim froze, eyes wide with terror. One soldier barked an order Sergei couldn't hear, stepping forward with menace. Sergei's heart hammered in his chest. His scope locked onto the scene. His finger found the trigger. Not at them, he told himself. A warning, a distraction. He fired. The shot rang out, striking the wall behind the soldiers. Shouts of confusion. Maxim bolted, sprinting through a narrow alley as bullets sprayed into the night, stone and wood splintering around him. Sergei fired again, deliberately wild, forcing the soldiers to duck for cover. His radio crackled. "Sniper! Get down!" "Where's it coming from?" someone yelled. Sergei's breaths were ragged now, his pulse deafening. Maxim disappeared into the maze of ruins, but more soldiers poured in, flashlights sweeping chaotically. He wanted to run down there, grab the boy, drag him to safety, but he was pinned, trapped between his duty and his heart. "Sniper, report!" the radio barked. Sergei swallowed hard. Engaged. Enemy fleeing east, pursuing. Another lie. He watched helplessly as Maxim darted into an abandoned factory, his small frame a ghost in the dark. Soldiers closed in like wolves, their boots pounding mercilessly. Then, something remarkable. From a shadowy corner, Maxim grabbed a loose metal pipe and hurled it across the room. It clattered noisily, drawing the soldiers' attention away from his true escape route, a broken window near the back. Sergei held his breath, tracking the boy as he slipped through the gap and vanished into the snowy wilderness beyond. The soldiers scrambled, cursing, chasing after the wrong lead. Sergei slumped against the frozen earth, eyes burning. For the first time in weeks, Maxim was gone. Truly gone, out of sight. But Sergei's chest was heavy, crushed under the weight of what he had done, and what he hadn't. The silence between them, once a bond, now felt like betrayal. The storm had broken by dawn, leaving a heavy, eerie stillness over the ruined village. Snow lay thick and undisturbed, as if trying to erase the chaos of the night before. But Sergei knew better. Underneath that quiet veneer, everything had changed. He crouched low in the shadows of a ruined house, clutching his rifle with frozen fingers. His breath came in shallow bursts, each one visible in the biting cold. His mind raced with images of Maxim, his small figure darting into the darkness, the hollow of his wide eyes as the soldiers closed in. And then, nothing. Sergei hadn't seen him since. The guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. He had crossed every line, risked everything to protect the boy, and yet, when it mattered most, he'd been powerless. A sudden noise snapped him back to the present, light footsteps, fast and purposeful, crunching over fresh snow. Sergei swung his rifle around, eyes narrowing. Then he saw him. Maximum. The boy stumbled into view, breathless and red-cheeked, his eyes blazing with urgency. Sergei's heart lurched, relief, shock, and dread crashing together in a tidal wave. Maxim spotted him almost instantly, sprinting toward Sergei's hiding spot. He dropped to his knees, panting hard, and shoved something into Sergei's gloved hands. A tattered map. Sergei frowned, glancing at the crude markings. Maxim's small, frost-bitten fingers jabbed at a point. A narrow pass through the woods, an escape route. Sergei's chest tightened. The boy had come back, not to hide, but to save him. He shook his head, gesturing urgently for Maxim to leave, to run, to get as far away as possible. But Maxim's jaw clenched, his eyes filled with a fierce defiance Sergei had never seen before. He shook his head. No, not without you. A burst of gunfire shattered the fragile moment. Sergei ducked instinctively, pushing Maxim down behind a fallen beam. Soldiers' voices rang out, sharp and close, boots crunching toward them. "Stay down," Sergei mouthed, grabbing his rifle and peeking over the edge. 4 soldiers, close, too close. He fired, a clean shot, dropping the lead man. The others dove for cover, shouting orders, returning fire blindly into the ruins. "Flank them!" someone yelled. Sergei's breath burned in his lungs. He fired again, pinning them back, but he knew. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered. He turned to Maxim, gripping his shoulders tightly, staring into those wide, frightened eyes. He pointed to the map, then to the woods beyond. "Go." Now Maxim shook his head furiously, tears brimming, but Sergei didn't give him a choice. He grabbed the boy's hand, pressed the map into his palm, and gave him a final, firm push. "Run." Maxim hesitated one agonizing moment longer, then turned and sprinted, disappearing into the skeletal trees, his small figure swallowed by the snow and shadows. Sergei rose, rifle ready, positioning himself between the boy's escape route and the advancing soldiers. His breaths came sharp and fast, but his grip was steady, his resolve unshakable. He would buy Maxim the time he needed. Bullets tore through the air, striking stone and wood, showering Sergei in splinters. He fired back, methodical, relentless, his focus razor-sharp. Above the chaos, in the far distance, Sergei caught a glimpse, a tiny figure darting safely into the deeper woods. Maxim was gone. Sergei's chest tightened, a strange peace settling over him even as the gunfire roared. No matter what happened now, he had done what he set out to do. He had kept his silent promise. The woods stretched endlessly before Maxim, a frozen maze of shadows and silence. His breath came in ragged bursts as he stumbled through knee-deep snow, clutching the tattered map Sergei had pressed into his hand. Every few steps he glanced back, eyes wide, heart pounding, but the ridge and ruins had long since disappeared into the blizzard's veil. He was alone again. But this time, something was different. For the first time since the bombs fell, since the screams had faded, Since his world had gone quiet, Maxim didn't feel entirely abandoned. He could still feel Sergei's rough grip on his shoulders, see the fierce determination in the soldier's eyes, that silent command, run, live. Tears blurred his vision as he pressed on, the cold biting into his bones. Sergei's sacrifice weighed heavy on him, but beneath the sorrow was a flicker of something new, hope. Hours passed, maybe longer. Time had no meaning in the endless white. Then, through the swirling snow, Maxim spotted it, the faint outline of rooftops, the flicker of firelight behind frost-covered windows. A village. His knees buckled with relief as he stumbled forward. Every ounce of strength poured into those final steps. He collapsed at the edge of the road, arms wrapped tight around the map, his chest heaving with silent sobs. Villagers ran to him, voices rising in alarm, but Maxim couldn't hear their words. He looked up into their blurred faces, tears freezing on his cheeks, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he let his eyes close. He was safe. Somewhere far behind in the shattered ruins, Sergei remained. The soldiers never reported him missing. They assumed he had fallen in the chaos of the ambush. But legends whispered among the ranks, of a sniper who vanished into the snow, of a lone wolf who walked away from his orders, leaving only echoes behind. And in the quiet hours of dawn, when the wind stilled and the snow seemed to hold its breath, it was said you could still feel his presence there, watchful, waiting, guarding, not as a soldier, but as a man who, for one fleeting moment, chose humanity over war.